Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. Today's video is going to be about life in the colonies, and this is going to focus more on economic and social life in the American colonies. Now, remember, this is still before the Revolutionary War. We haven't gotten to that yet, so we are still, the colonies that we are going to be talking about here are still under English rule. So let's go ahead and get started. England and its colonial economy. England's colonization of the Americas was driven in large part by financial concerns. The purpose of the English colonies was to increase the wealth and power of England, the mother country. The economic policy of mercantilism supported those ideas. Now, if we think back to the last section we talked about, one of the problems that was plaguing England at this time was poverty and lack of jobs and things for the people to do. So they had this growing population that was brought on by all of these new crops and things that were coming from all over the world, but they were running out of jobs. They didn't have anything for these people to do, so that was an economic issue to them. So one of the reasons that they started colonizing the Americas was, and this is a pretty cruel thing to say, but they wanted to ship all of these poor homeless people to the new country to give them jobs. At busy colonial ports, merchants shipped raw materials to England, where they reloaded their ships with English manufactured goods to sell in the colonies. The British economy and mercantilism. The policy of mercantilism holds that a nation or an empire could build wealth and power by developing its industries and exporting manufactured goods in exchange for gold and silver. This policy encouraged monarchs to minimize imports from rival empires and to drive those rivals out of colonial markets. By selling more than it purchased, the empire could build wealth in the form of gold or silver. In general, the colonies fit nicely into the mercantile system because of their unique economic strengths. In England, land was scarce, whereas people were numerous, which meant that labor was cheap. Money for investment was abundant. This combination favored the development of industry. So the American colonies were set up just to make England money. I mean, that was the primary driving force that made the country itself favor settling in the New World. In the colonies, however, there was more land but fewer people and less money for investment. That combination favored agriculture. As a result, more than 90% of the colonists lived and worked on farms or plantations. They exported their produce in ships to buy tropical goods from Africa or the Caribbean, or manufactured goods from England. So these different places are going to have different strengths. You know, the development that was present in England favored factories and manufacturing, whereas the wide open areas of the colonies favored agriculture. So there's pros and cons whenever it comes to mercantilism. We're going to take a look at this chart for just a moment. Some of the pros of mercantilism is that colonies made money by furnishing raw materials for England's growing industries. So England is growing these industries, this manufacturing. Well, they're going to need the raw materials. They're going to need the things that they sort of like ingredients whenever you're cooking. You need those raw materials. So that is what the colonies were going to do. They were going to provide the raw materials for the industries in England. Colonies were able to purchase manufactured goods from England. England became wealthier than most other European countries, and the abundance of land allowed colonial economy to flourish. So those are the pros of mercantilism at this time. Now the cons. This caused a shortage of physical currency in colonies. This is going to benefit England more than the colonies, and it's going to increase the colonies' dependence on England, and this discouraged the import of non-English goods to the colonies. So England is going to be the primary winner out of this system. It's going to cause a shortage of physical currency in the colonies. Now that refers to money. There's going to be a shortage of actual, like, if this was today in our country, it would be dollar bills. There's going to be a shortage of like money that you can put your hands on. So people are going to have to trade goods more in the colonies than actually use currency like coins. The Navigation Acts increased colonial commerce. The English regarded colonial commerce as the key to imperial power. By controlling colonial trade, they could collect more custom duties, taxes on imported goods. They used this money to build a stronger navy, which enabled them to defeat the Dutch and later the French. To obtain more sailors, ships, and trade, Parliament in the mid-1600s enacted a series of trade laws called the Navigation Acts. The Navigation Acts stated that only English ships with English sailors could trade with English colonies. The acts also specified that especially valuable colonial goods, including tobacco and sugar, be shipped only to the mother country. Colonial ships were free to take their other products elsewhere. For example, New Englanders could export fish to Portugal and Spain. So these navigation acts are going to come into place to only benefit England. That's really the only thing that was used. That's the only people that benefited from the Navigation Acts. This did not really help anyone else, and this is going to be the first of many acts and rules and things that England tries to enact on to the colonies that is going to breed discontent, to raise the aggravation of the colonists, and I believe we all know what that eventually leads to. Finally, the colonies had to import all their European goods via an English port, where they paid custom duties. For example, if a Virginian wanted a bottle of French wine, the wine had to come to America by way of an English port, rather than directly from France. Violators risked the confiscation of their ships and cargoes. So, this is some really heavy-handed control put onto all sorts of businesses that had to do with doing business in the colonies. The Navigation Acts promoted the dramatic growth of English colonial commerce and the nation's prosperity. During the 1600s, English merchant shipping doubled. The value of imports and exports increased at least sixfold. In 1600, England had been a relatively poor nation. By 1700, England's commerce was global and London had become Europe's leading seaport. At first, the Navigation Acts hurt the colonists economically because they had depended upon Dutch ships and Dutch manufactured goods. That changed by 1700. Protected by the Navigation Acts, British manufacturing and shipping improved in quality and quantity, outstripping the Dutch. The colonists could obtain better goods from British suppliers at lower costs. Thereafter, colonists often protested some particular feature of the Navigation Acts, but not the whole system. So while there were some good and some bad in the Navigation Acts, once again, the British are the primary winners here. A consumer revolution. Most colonists lived on farms or plantations. There, they produced most of their own food, fuel, and homespun cloth. But no farm or plantation could produce everything that a family needed. The colonists wanted to purchase expensive imported goods such as sugar from the West Indies, tea from India, and manufactured goods from Britain. To obtain these goods, every colonial farm and plantation needed to produce a surplus of produce that they could export. The expanding transatlantic commerce produced a consumer revolution that brought more and cheaper goods to the colonies. Between 1720 and 1770, colonial imports per person increased by 50%. So up until this point, a lot of these farmers had just been happy to produce what they and their family needed to sustain themselves. But if they were wanting to get their hands on some of these more exotic goods or things from Europe, they're going to have to produce more. They're going to have to produce a surplus. They're going to have to produce extra on top of what their family needs to, eat to survive if they want to be able to trade with these merchants. And the transatlantic commerce, which is the ships going back and forth across the Atlantic Ocean with all these goods, brings about what's called this consumer revolution. British manufacturers increasingly needed the growing American market. In 1700, the American colonies consumed about 10% of British exports. The rate of consumption grew to 37% by 1772. Grateful for the prosperity in consumer goods, the British and the colonists felt greater pride in their shared empire. Both the middle class and the poorer class, however, bought more than they could afford. Americans suffered from a chronic trade imbalance, as they imported more than they exported. Most colonists bore mounting debts. The shortage of cash and the increasing debts fed a nagging unease at odds with the overall prosperity and general contentment with the empire. So at first this trading situation was good. The colonists were okay with it, but they noticed that they kept bringing in more than they were sending back out. So they're going to keep sending out more and more of their money, and they're going to run out of money in the colonies. And this is going to lead people to go into debt, and since there was a shortage of cash in the colonies, they're not able to pay these debts off, simply because the money is not there to be obtained. So this is going to create a major issue in the colonies. Okay, there's a map that shows the triangular trade. And what is the triangular trade? Well, triangular trade between three continents. During the 1700s, a pattern of trade emerged that connected England, its colonies, and West Africa. Trade among the three continents had three main parts and formed a triangular shape. On the first leg of the journey, British ships loaded with manufactured goods sailed to Africa's west coast. There they swapped British manufactures, such as guns and cloth, for enslaved Africans. On the second, or middle leg, the traders then carried the enslaved Africans to the American colonies. After selling the slaves for colonial raw materials, such as sugar, timber, and tobacco, the traders returned to Europe. So this three destination trip became known as the triangular trade. It's sort of the development of the Columbian Exchange. And we are going to end there for this video. If you all have any questions, you know how to get a hold of me. Either leave a comment on the video, send me a message through Schoology, or an email. So if you have any questions about anything we went over, just let me know. And I hope everybody's having a great day, and I'll see you again real soon.